almost up and going. I can see a few of you jumping on. Those of you who are joining us on the webinar, you should be able to, if I work out how to do it, type questions, and I should be able to see them and answer them as we go, assuming everything's working. Right, so we're live on YouTube as well now, and we're about to go live. On Instagram. We're famous. There's like, if you saw it from my angle, you'd see about 7 different screens with my own face looking at me. So it's a bit crazy. I'm still getting used to it all. And every different screen, because we go live at all these different things, every different one shows up, is at a different timing. So that's crazy. I'm just trying to turn on. Messaging on the Zoom. Right. So I think we're up. Guys, welcome back to another virtual tasting of Tractorless Vineyard wines. So I'm Jeff, I'm the winemaker. I'm here at home today. As probably most of you are, sitting at your homes as well, from various places across the place. So a little bit about Tractorless Vineyard is we're based in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales. We run our vineyard all biodynamically, and then we run sheep through the vineyard for the whole growing season, which means we use the tractor 60% less, and that's where the name comes from, for Tractorless. So we're quite a little sustainable label. We have a huge selection of wines, so you guys only would have got 10 sample bottles. That's just a selection of all the wines we do. We have a huge selection. Unfortunately, I can't rebottle any of our sparkling wines because they go flat in the bottle. So we've only been able to do our still wines. I'm thinking about trialing some of our sweeter wines, but I'm a little bit worried about the ability of those to travel around Australia. And the funny thing is, I've been fielding emails all week this week about people from around the world that actually want to join us for our virtual tasting. So I've had people from Holland and Hawaii, Canada. We are working very hard because our wines are in USA at the moment, so we're working really hard, and hopefully in the next week or so we can actually start doing these live video casts across to the USA and California. So hope you guys have all your wines ready. If you're as organised as some of the girls that joined us last week, they had cheese platters and meat platters with them as well, and I felt highly left out. As you can see, it's just me and my table. No cheese and meat platters for me today. So let's get into it. So, one of the things that I had realised the last few weeks is that I didn't put any vintages on the tasting notes when they came out. So I'll have to give them to you on the way through. So first we're going to taste our 2016 Sauvignon Blanc. So this is a Fumé style Sauvignon Blanc. And when I say Fumé, it's more of a stylistic thing. It originates from France in the Bordeaux region, where they do a Sauvignon Blanc that has a really flinty, metallic, flinty sort of burnt match characters to it. So a lot of that actually comes from their fruit, but in New World winemaking, like here in Australia and New Zealand and California, when we make a Sauvignon Blanc that's 100% oak fermented and 100% oak matured, we give it that name of Fumé Blanc because it's that style of wine. So a couple of interesting things with our Fumé is, first we do a double pick. So we harvest half the grapes at around about the 10 Beaumay mark. So 10 Beaumay is our measure of our sugar, which essentially converts over to alcohol. So 10 Beaumay will end up being about 10% alcohol. So we harvest half of it at about 10% alcohol, which gives it those really nice crisp green acids and that zippy character. And then we harvest the second part of it with in about 12 Beaumay. And that's probably 2 or 3 weeks after the first harvest. And that gives you that real nice passion fruity and tropical characters that you get in Sauvignon Blancs. The other thing you'll notice you know, one of the things I'm not a massive fan of with Sauvignon Blancs is that they just got so much fruit and bang in your face. I just find them overpowering sometimes. And so what I love about these Fumé styles is by fermenting and aging in the oak, it really mellows out the characters and softens them out and rounds them out. So you see when you smell it, you get those beautiful like green lantana and passion fruity characters. The best bit about doing a tasting too on a Saturday afternoon is I can enjoy a drink with you guys. And then when you taste it, you get that great fresh acid, really nice sort of soft, mellow, tropical fruits. You don't get that bang of fruit in your face. And that's why I like this style of winemaking. You know, all of our wines, you'll notice as we go through them, they're so different. Every single one of our, I don't just make a Gris or a Riesling for the hell of making a Gris or Riesling. I want to make a really specific style that has really specific winemaking techniques behind it. And each one you'll see really represents that sort of style of winemaking. So this is all, Tractorless began in 2013, and my background is consulting to big companies and contract winemaking for other people. In 2013, you know, I kind of got a little bit bored of doing the same old commercial winemaking. And so I started Tractorless Vineyard more as a way to keep myself interested in winemaking, doing some old techniques, some, you know, a lot of these European techniques that I use create wines that need to be bottle aged for a long period of time before you can release them. And so, you know, a lot of my contract clients don't like that because they want to get something into bottle as fast as possible so they can get it out to the market. So, you know, this style of winemaking that we do here, Tractorless, not here, this is home, but at the winery, is, you know, it's terrible for cash flow, but it's making things the way I like to drink them and the way I want to make them. And, you know, I hope other people enjoy those styles. And I'm finding, you know, again, a lot of great feedback coming back from people because, you know, they are different. There's a different level of texture. And so, yeah, it's quite good that to get that feedback and the difference. So that's our Sauvignon Blanc. Nice, crisp, really mellow. You still see those tropical characters and those nice green lantana characters. Now, Southern Highlands of New South Wales is really well known for well known for cool climate wines like Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio. Just sorry if I sort of get a little bit distracted. I'm going to try and fix my messaging, which is just not working for me at the moment. Don't you love technical things? That's the coolest thing about going live, isn't it? You know, I did one last weekend where I was out at the winery. I set up this little corner in the winery with the barrels behind me. And the best thing about that was the whole winery was the biggest mess because I was in the middle of doing something and no one knew. And I thought, oh, I'm going to get away with this. And as I got my messaging up, as I turned everything on, someone walked in the door and I'm like, I'm live. Anyway, so gotta love live. I've got messaging back now so I can see people's questions. So next, as I was saying, the Southern Highlands is really well known for cool climate wines. Pinot Gris, Pinot Grigio, Riesling, Chardonnay, those sort of wines. And everyone always asks me, what's the difference between Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio? And so I made the difference so you guys can taste it. So the first one I'm going to taste is our Pinot Grigio. Now, Pinot Grigio is the Italian way of making it. So it's really zippy fresh style. And the Italians have a really different philosophy of winemaking. So the Italians, their philosophy of winemaking is all about the food. So they're trying to create a wine perfectly matched for the food of their region or of their area. So Italy, a lot of seafood, a lot of maritime areas. So Pinot Grigio really suits those sort of seafood flavors. And they're trying to create a really fresh, zippy, steely, crisp style of wine. So what they do first is they're the first to harvest it. So a good way to remember, Italians, always in a hurry, so the first people to harvest the grapes. they harvest at around about that 11 to 12 BOMA. So that means that a Grigio should be about 11 to 12% alcohol. So if you're getting something a bit higher than about 12.5, you're probably pushing across from what's a Grigio style into what's a Gris style, which is the French style. So we're going to have a look at that next, the Gris style. But essentially, they're both made from the same grapes. They're both made from the Pinot Gris grape variety. If it's the Italian way of making it, it's called Grigio. If it's the French way of making it, it's called Gris. So we're looking first at the Grigio. And the Italians, firstly, they harvest it really early, so around about that 11.5 to 12% alcohol. Secondly, they're not afraid of oxygen at all in their ferment. So they actually bubble oxygen through the juice until it goes brown, and then they ferment it. And that helps give you that really nice crisp palate and steely palate. And it also gives you this really nice like green apple characters to the wine. So if you give it a smell, you can definitely see that green apple character, and that's that ferment technique. They also ferment it quite cool and crisp, and then they leave it for a long period of time with the dead yeast, and you start to get some more of those secondary mouthfeel characters. So if you have a look at the Grigio, really fresh, crisp style. You know, you can imagine having this with some like of those, you know, those really nice, they're those little South Coast oysters. I love those oysters. Those oysters with the Pinot Grigio is like the best match ever. It's awesome. Now, maybe we should do like a live food and wine matching. That's a great idea. So yeah, seafood, really crisp Italian style. It's all about the food. And one of the unfortunate things when you're trying Italian style wines is sometimes you really miss how good they are if you're not eating them with food. So I hope some of you guys out there were a bit more prepared than me and have like some food there in front of you. And you'll see the flavors are really quite significantly different when you're eating it with something. And it's one of the things I love about food and wine is how they interact. For a vegan alternative for this, you know, there's so many great like fresh sort of foods around. One of the things that I found that has been really surprisingly great with the Grigio is sushi, and not necessarily because of the sushi itself, but wasabi. For some reason, when you have wasabi and Grigio and Gris as well, I've found it with the Gris, the flavors just interact and they just give you this really sweet character to the wasabi. It really softens those edges, and then it makes all these pear characters come out in the Grigio and the Gris. So that's an interesting match to try and get through. There's a great little local cafe called Four Seasons, and they're a vegan and raw cafe, and we're starting to do more and more food matching with them. You know, my wife is vegetarian, and so, you know, I'm quite open and into vegan and vegetarian food as well, and there's some amazing foods out there. So, but I'm still learning all the matches a bit more. So that's Grigio. So Grigio is the Italian way of doing it. Next, we're going to look at the Pinot Gris. I can't show you the label on this one because I forgot to label the bottle. I'm running around crazy around the home before turning this on, and I couldn't find a labeled one. So Pinot Gris is the French way of doing it. They're both made from the same grape variety, which is the Pinot Gris variety. Grigio is the Italian way of doing it, and Gris is the French way of doing it. So the French, it's more about the wine. So the French are trying to create a big, soft, round, voluptuous style of wine. So the first thing you'll notice, and you can even see it straight up when you have it in your glass, is there's that color difference. It's a little bit bronzy. Sometimes they can be a little bit pinky, and that's because of the grape variety. So Pinot Gris means grey in French, and you actually do see a grey colour develop on the grapes as they get riper and riper, and they do have a little bit of pink in them. So when we're harvesting them early, like a Grigio, which is that 11.5, 12% alcohol, they really don't have any colour to them. When we're getting up around that 13.5 to 14% alcohol, which is where the Gris sits, they start to get a little bit of colour in them. So you'll see that in there. You quite often get that bronzy colour in a Pinot Gris. The second thing you'll notice is the legs on it when you spin it. Now, when I say legs, I talk about you'll see a rim forms above the wine, and it sort of dribbles back down into it. And that's actually the volatiles in the wine. They evaporate out of the wine, and then they condensate on the glass when they get up higher and fall down. Now, the bigger the legs, the longer the legs, and the higher the amount of evaporation there, that's alcohol. So it's a good example. That's a good way of telling how something's more alcoholic, is the higher alcohol percentage you get, those more legs. So the degrees should always be around about 13 to 14% alcohol. So this one's about 13.5. The French have also really different winemaking techniques. They are super afraid of oxygen. So I said the Italians use a lot of oxygen. The French do everything under carbon dioxide cover. They probably ferment a little bit warmer, and their target wine is this standalone wine that's big, round, and voluptuous. And that's exactly what you see in that wine. Fleshy pears, really full fruits and soft, round flavors. It's amazing to see those two wines are from the exact same vineyard, exact same grape variety. They're just harvested different dates and made differently. So it's a good example of how the winemaker can really influence the wines. So that's Pinot Gris. And I love that wine. And if you've got so the Pinot Gris and the Chardonnay, if you've got some nice like soft cheese in front of you, some really creamy cheese, like a fromage dauphinois or something like that, that's got that real like nice fatty cream texture, they are a really good match with those two wines. They just bring this nice buttery softness out. And so next one, oops, I opened it and forgot to show you. So this is our Chardonnay. So I've forgotten the vintages. So 2016 Chardonnay. So Chardonnay in Australia has gone through a really interesting evolution. We went from in the early 70s and 80s, it was all about oak, and we had these super, super oaky Chardonnays. And then in the late sort of 90s, early 2000s, it was all about no oak at all, and everyone moved away from those oaky Chardonnays. And now we're coming back and finding this really nice balance between the two. And our Chardonnay, it is a little bit in those oakier styles, but we don't use new oak, so it doesn't overpower it. The Chardonnay is a variety for a winemaker that is a fun variety to make. It's almost like a blank canvas. So when we look at Sauvignon Blanc or Pinot Gris, yes, there's a lot we can do as a winemaker to influence that wine, but there's still so much fruit flavor that it can, overpower the things you are doing to that wine. So it's sort of hidden underneath all the fruit. Chardonnay is quite a subtle variety, and because everything I do as a winemaker to a Chardonnay, you can see it and you can taste it. So it really is a blank canvas for a winemaker, and it's a really good example of a winemaker's personality, I guess, or their sort of techniques or their preferences a lot. Chardonnay for me is all about balance. So I love those oaky Chardonnays. I love to see a little bit of butteriness in the Chardonnay, but I also want to make sure I see that nice zippy fresh fruit and those grapefruits and those sort of things. And you definitely see that oak character in there. You definitely see like the nice fresh grapefruits and citrus characters. And that buttery flavor you get in there is really interesting. So that's actually from a second ferment. So when we're making all our red wines and some of our white wines, they go through two fermentations. So the first fermentation is alcoholic fermentation, and that takes the sugar and it converts it to alcohol. So probably the most important part of the whole process. The second fermentation is a malolactic fermentation. So it's actually a bacterial fermentation, and we add a bacteria and it converts the malic acid, which is the same acid you find in an apple, and it converts it to lactic acid, which is the acid that you find in milk. So it's a softer, easier drinking style of acid. A byproduct of this process is a flavor that's really buttery, these buttery flavors. And, in the 80s, I'm sure if you drank Chardonnays in the 80s, you definitely remember those super oaky and super buttery Chardonnays. And that's from this malolactic fermentation. Now, middle of the 80s sometime, one of the famous wine writers said, geez, I'm so sick of these buttery Chardonnays. And so the companies that produce these bacteria started selecting against that buttery flavour. And as a result, when I go and buy a bacteria now from these companies, it converts the malic acid to lactic acid, but it doesn't give me any of those buttery flavours. So it's just a conversion, softening of the acid. So for lack of a better word, I found an heirloom variety of bacteria, and we use 5% of that in our barrels, and then the other 5% is wild ferment, and then the other 90% is the more standard bacteria that you can get, which softens it out. But you can see, you know, there's definitely obvious buttery notes in that Chardonnay, and you can see that's 5%. So you can imagine in the 80s when they were using 100% of these bacteria that are super buttery, why they were so overpowering and why people thought, yeah, that's a bit much. So this is only 5%. But I love that Chardonnay. It's one of those, everyone comes into the cellar door and they say, oh, you know, we're not Chardonnay drinkers. We don't drink Chardonnay. Across Australia, it's always the biggest selling white. And in our cellar door, it's still always the biggest selling. And it's amazing that we all must be closet Chardonnay drinkers or something, I think. But to me, a great Chardonnay is all about balance. I want to see a little bit of oak and a little bit of that toastiness. You get that nice honeyness from the oak that's been bottle aged. You get that those nice buttery characters, but it's then all nice and crisp and grapefruity and clean finish to that wine as well. So I'm a massive fan of that Chardonnay. I love those balanced wines. So next is our rosé. So this rosé, a couple of things you'll notice. First is the little bottle. So these little bottles are 500 ml bottles. And the idea of the 500 ml bottles was that 2 people can drink a bottle over lunchtime and be under the limit. And so that was the original idea. I actually can't get the 500 ml bottles anymore. So our next year's rosé, or next year, will be 2021, because we didn't harvest anything this year because of the fires. So our 2021 rosé will be back in the 750 ml bottles. The other thing you'll notice is the colour is probably a little bit darker to what's probably trendy at the moment in rosé. The big trend at the moment are these really pale south of France style of rosés. I don't mind them. I'm a really big fan of texture in my wines. I like to smell it, I like to taste it, but I also like to feel a wine. And to get that texture, I need to leave it with the skins a bit longer. So a lot of people don't realise that if I take a red grape and I squeeze it, the pulp and the juice inside is actually white. And so to make a red wine, I need to ferment it with the skins, and I extract all those colours out of the skins. To make a rosé wine, I leave it with the skins for a period of time to extract the colour I want. So normally for those pale rosés, it'd probably be like maybe 1-2 hours on the skins. I leave it with the skins until I just start to get a nice sort of furry feeling just here on my tongue. And that's usually about the 10 to 12 hour mark. And that's why we get that sort of slightly darker colour. And unfortunately for those of you who remember the Matouche rosé, it's quite a dark rosé. People immediately at the moment think of dark rosé as being sweet, but it's a bone dry rosé, really nice texture. I can see a few of you agree with me with the rosé. I love this rosé. And this is, you know, this is actually a great match for antipasta. You know, this is my summertime wine. You know, even and you know, people talk about putting wines over ice. Oh no, it's sacrilegious, la la la. You know what? On a hot day over ice, you know, it's about enjoyment. It's not about what I think is what everyone thinks right and wrong. I love a chilled rosé. So hot day, my antipasta plate on my deck, perfect. It's 100% Pinot Noir rosé. So you get that really beautiful strawberry character coming through from the Pinot Noir. So now we're going to move on to some reds. So the first thing you'll notice, well, you won't notice, but you're about to notice when we move on to the reds, are these slightly different labels with the barrels. So we actually have 2 series of wines. So our first wine series is our sustainable series. And so our sustainable series is 100% off our biodynamically run vineyards. we then created a second series called the Creators Series, and that's the one here with the barrel. Now, the Creators Series is not 100% off our biodynamic blocks. So we have some blocks that we have in conversion. We have some block wines that we make from our blocks and some other people's blocks. We sort of do some blending. And we also do some wines where, for example, Shiraz and Cabernet, way too cold in the Highlands to grow Shiraz and Cabernet. So we work really closely with some growers up in the up in Hilltops in Young, and we get our Shiraz and Cabernet from them. And I wanted to, I love those varieties, so I still wanted to make them. But there's, I'm a little bit of a purist and a picky person. I don't believe that you should be making a Shiraz or a Cabernet from substandard fruit. So, way too cold in the Highlands for those varieties, which is why we get them from the Young region. So it's still cool climate, but just warm enough to ripen those varieties. The other thing is that, when you're making those wines down in the cool climate, that they're just a little bit thin and weedy. So that's why we created the two labels. I really wanted to make it clear what's off our biodynamic blocks and what's not. So that's why you've got the sustainable labels, which are the ones with the sheep and the tractor, and then the Creators Series labels, which are the ones with the barrels. So the first red we're going to taste is the Lost Flock. So the Lost Flock is actually a blend. So this is my everyday drinking red. Most of the wines that I make, I'm doing something like sitting at home, eating something, or I'm listening to music at home, or doing something, and I'm sitting there and I go, you know what, I really need to make this style of wine to go with this moment. So I was actually sitting in front of the fire, drinking a big Barossa red, which I love. I love those big Barossa reds, but I find them a little bit heavy and overpowering. And so I wanted to make something that gave me the same nice, soft, velvety tannins and those long raspberry aftertaste, but wasn't as heavy and a bit more delicate. And so I came up with the blend we call the Lost Flock. And so essentially this is a Grenache Shiraz Mourvedre blend, so GSM, but it also has, so it's Grenache Shiraz Mourvedre. It's also got a little bit of Merlot and a little bit of Petit Verdot. And that gives you all those nice flavors and layers and texture, but also gives you this really long lingering sort of raspberry aftertaste. I can see some people have been enjoying this at parties too. This is a wine where I've had a lot of friends have weddings, and we'll put the Lost Flock on, and usually at a wedding there's a nice split between whites and reds, and you always use more whites. And every wedding I've done with the Lost Flock, we've had do emergency trips out to the winery to stock up with the Lost Flock. It's just such a nice, light, delicate red. So you'll see, this is my everyday wine. Really nice, soft, delicate tannins, and those velvety tannins, and chocolates and plums. But the best thing about this wine is this lingering raspberry aftertaste that goes on, and that's from the Grenache in there. And that just gives it that really nice Grenache raspberry character that lingers. This is a great wine too, I think, for if you're going out to dinner with people, going over to someone's house for barbecue, because, some people like Shiraz, some people like Cabernet, and when you have a blend, someone can always find a flavour in there that they like. So it's a good way of pleasing as many people at the party as possible. So that's a Lost Flock. So that's my day-to-day wine. Next, we're going to look at our Pinot Noir, so the Reserve Pinot Noir. So this is back to our Sustainable Series label. So this is off our biodynamic blocks. Now this is my little baby. So Pinot Noir, because it's such a light red variety, it's like the Chardonnay, where everything you do as a winemaker you see. But it's not so much a blank canvas. Pinot Noir they want to be something. And but the problem is they want to be something, and if you get it wrong as a winemaker, it's really easy to see. So it sticks out. So it's a really, it's almost seen as the pinnacle of winemaking techniques. Now, New Zealand, Australia, America, all those new world countries, again, are really well known for these beautiful, fresh, sort of delicate style Pinots. I always think of ballerinas. You know, there's all these levels, there's so much complexity and interest, but it's at the same time really light and delicate. So that's probably the traditional way of making it in these New World areas. This is not that style. So this is a really old school, funky Burgundian style. Heaps of whole bunches, heaps of stems. You know, when we make this wine and I put it into bottle, it's virtually undrinkable when it goes back into the bottle. It's just like funky and really bitter and resiny. And that's because of the stems and skins. But you leave it in bottle. So we've left this in bottle for 3 years before we release it. When you taste it, and I haven't tasted it for a while, so, well, a while, maybe 4 days or something. It's softening a bit more now, but you just get tiny, you still get a tiny little hint of bitterness on the back palate. And the French would wait for that to go. So the French use this technique in Burgundy all the time, and it creates those really big, voluptuous, funky style Pinots that age like really well. Like, you know, this is just going to age and age and age and age and age. You'll be drinking it in 50 years and you'll have those really nice forest flory, cigar boxy characters. So the French are used to aging things in bottles, and there's these flavors you get when you bottle age wines that it doesn't matter what you do, the only way to get that flavor is the bottle aged wine. And the only way to get like those really nice forest floor cigar boxy characters is to make it in this really funky big style and then let it age a really long time. So this is 3 years in bottle. So 2015 Pinot, 3 years in bottle. Probably in the last month or so, that little bit of bitterness has dropped off. And so this is starting to get to where the French would just release the wine. You know, there's not many people that make wines like that these days. You know, people are very wary of cash flow and markets. And so most wines are made so that they're sold. And most wines that are sold are drunk within 24 hours of them being purchased. And so people don't age wines anymore. Winemakers and companies are really aware of this. And so most wines are just made to be drunk straight away. And that's one of the things that I really missed as a winemaker is one, making these wines that are designed to age, but also drinking these wines that have been aged, because there's just a so different flavour spectrum and textures and, you know, flavours that the descriptions just don't sound like they'd be nice. And a good example of that is when I was studying at uni, I was lucky enough, one of my teachers was a Master of Wine, and there was only about 10 of us studying winemaking at uni, and he found this 1956 McGill's Burgundy, which is Penfolds before it was Penfolds. And it was in a half bottle, and he'd rescued it from a skip of this old hotel they'd been throwing things out or something. And we opened this, and so it would have been about a, you know, that we would have been close to a 40-year aging on that. And it changed my life for aged wines. It just had this amazing rotting guava and composty flavors to it. And when you think of the flavors, you just think they're not nice flavors, but when you drunk it, it was just like a whole new level. And so that got me into these aging, and I like aging wines, and I want other people to experience some aged wines. And so we do a lot of wines where I do the aging. So that's one of the examples. That's 3 years in bottle. We actually now hold back a lot of wines that we will re-release as a museum wines. Things like the Chardonnay, I really enjoy old Chardonnays, really old Rieslings. We do a dry Riesling that we don't have tasting at the moment because it's all sitting aging until it gets those really nice aged characters to it. So there's some things to look out for, and hopefully we're not in this lockdown too much longer. But if we are, I do have plans to release a second virtual wine tasting, which will actually be our museum wines and some aged wines. So we might be hoping for that, but then we might not be. I'm not sure. So that's our Pinot Noir, big funky style Pinot. You know, one of my favourite food matches with that has actually, in recent times, was this. It was like this mushroomy nut loaf type thing nut loaf is not a really good description, and I'm sure the Four Seasons guys would kill me if I actually told them it was nut loaf, if I called it nut loaf, because I'm sure they call it something way different to that. But it was like a beautiful match. The mushrooms and that sort of woody, nutty character really resonated with those nice spicy characters of the Pinot Noir. It was a really great match. Another good match I've had recently is every year at the Southern Highlands, not this year, but every other year, we do what's called the Pie Time. So it's a festival of the pies. So you've never seen a month of so many pies in your life. And we do a pie degustation, a pie and Pinot degustation, where we mix, I think we usually do about 4 pies matched with 4 wines. And one of the pies last year was a venison and juniper berry pie. And I matched it with this Pinot, and that was a great match. The venison, venison can sometimes be a bit too overpowering for Pinot Noir. And, people will often suggest to match Pinot Noirs with things like duck and sometimes those like more gamey, like pheasants and those sorts of things. But I think because of this style, because it's a really big, fleshy style of Pinot, it can handle those gamey characters like venison. And it was actually a really good match. So next is our Tractorless Vineyard Shiraz. So this is our Creators Series Shiraz. This is probably the most Australian wine we make. And, this goes back to my roots. When I finished winemaking, my first job was with Clonakilla, and they're really famous for their Shiraz Viognier and their Viognier from, and their Shiraz, straight Shiraz, which is actually from same vineyard, same region, Hilltops. And, I wanted to go back. Australia's famous for Shiraz. We do a really good, we're renowned around the world for doing Shiraz. So I really wanted to do a really traditional, cool climate Shiraz style, and that's what I've done. And it is the most Australian wine we do. It's destemmed, fermented for about 3 weeks, and then without the skin, without the stems or anything, pressed off into barrel for 12 to 18 months, and then bottled 12 to 18 months and released. And it's like just that really typical Australian cool climate Shiraz. You get those nice plums and chocolate and dark chocolate characters, and those and then you get this really nice sort of little lick of white pepper at the end as well, which is that cool climate edge to it. It's that little hint of spice, which I love. But so delicate, it's not like those really big, heavy Shirazes that you get from those real warmer climate regions. It's just got such elegance and delicacy to it. And I love that wine. It's just clean and full and beautiful tannin. If you drink a lot of cool climate Shiraz from Australia, that's what you're looking for, that exact wine. And I think it's done what I wanted it to do, which was sort of bring me back to my roots in winemaking and show off a style that I think is really worthwhile style of Australia. So that's our Shiraz. So next is our post-Mac Cabernet Sauvignon. So you'll notice a slightly different style of label. So these are our actually older labels. We've updated everything more to the sheet labels now and the picture labels. Now, I'm a huge fan of really old Cabernets. I really love those you get these nice soy saucy, fishy, savoury characters in a Cabernet, an old Cabernet. One of the biggest problems when you age a wine, though, is one, you lose your fruit. So eventually, as a wine ages, you start off with all this fruit here, and as it gets older, the fruit levels go down, and the more savoury sort of complex flavours go up. And when you run out of fruit and these complex flavours like this are too high, the wine tastes terrible. And so you still need a bit of fruit around to balance out those savoury flavours to make them like great tasting wines. And the French came up with this amazing technique they call post-ferment maceration. And basically what that means is when the ferment's finished, you leave the skins and the stems sitting with the wine for an extended period of time. So normal winemaking, something like our Shiraz, it actually, at ferment, we press it off. Our Pinot probably spends about 3 or 4 weeks sitting with the skins afterwards. But then the Post-mat Cabernet spends 18 months sitting with the skins. Now, a couple of things you'll notice, it's really bang in your face aromatic. And for a wine that's been in bottle for 3 years, you wouldn't expect that amount of fruit. And that's part of that technique. Gives you really lifted sort of capsicum-y, cassis, like crushed tomato leaf characters in it. Really zippy style. It really freshness to it. It's not a plump, soft red. It's quite a tart, clean style red. The other thing that happens when you age wine is the tannins change. So if you were to get a Cabernet, a young Cabernet, and you taste it, you know, when you taste a young Cabernet, you sort of get those kind of sharp, angular, a little bit chalky tannins to it. The tannins, I talk about that grip you get. Well, they're short chains. So when you age that bottle of Cabernet, over time, those short chains join together to a long chain, and a long chain is soft and velvety. So a short chain is a little bit hard and angular, and a long chain soft and velvety. But I start with a bottle, let's say I've got 100 tannins in there of these short chains, and as they age, they join, and so we go from 100 tannins to 50, and as they age, they join again, so we go to 50 to 25, and eventually what happens, we run out of tannin structure of that wine, and the wine cracks up. So if you've ever been lucky enough, I guess, to try a wine that's so old that it's cracked up, not lucky because the wine's had it, but lucky because it is the best description for this cracking up. It's literally like there's a crack right down the middle of the tongue. And you know, when you taste the wine, it fills your mouth and it's all round and soft and it fills every part of your mouth. Well, imagine there's just this gap right down the middle and this crack like, and that's when this tannin issue happens and you don't have enough tannin in the wine. So I don't know if it was by accident, but this technique of post-ferment maceration solves both those things. It solves our fruit problem and it solves our tannin problem. And what it does is, because you've got all these skins and stems sitting in there for such a long period of time, there's so much of these short tannins whizzing around in that tank, it forces them together into a long tannin, and then they're already long tannins when we put it into bottle. So then when we put it into bottle, we're putting in 100 long tannins, so it gives us that tannin length a lot longer. I have no idea how they worked out the fruit part of it, because when you make it and you bottle it, you don't get any fruit flavour at all. It tastes stemsy and resiny and bitter, and then you put it in a bottle and it just does not taste really good, and you just have faith that this process works. And I actually have talked to a lot of old winemakers from Australia asking them about this process. There's really not many people that have done this in Australia. There's some people doing it more so in California. They're starting to get up around about that 3-month mark, but 18 months is a really long time doing it. Some of the old school winemakers I've talked to who have tasted this wine since they actually come out of retirement to just do some little batches like this, because Bordeaux was made famous for these wines that are just aged phenomenally well. And, you know, we're talking 50 years plus. And so hopefully it works in Australia. But the thing you'll notice first is how fruity and lifted that is. And as I said, I don't know why that fruit's there. It's just, you do this technique and it tastes terrible, 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 terrible. You put it in a bottle and you think, oh, there's no fruit there. It's not tasting that great. And then all of a sudden, after about 12 months in bottle, bang, all this fruit just comes out. It's almost too fruity. So now, 3 years in bottle, that fruit level is starting to settle down a little bit for me. And that's why, and so I actually haven't drunk a lot of this Cabernet for the last few years because it's been too fruity for me. But now that it's starting to settle down, we're just starting to see some of these nice bottle characters come. But when you smell that, it just reeks of Cabernet, that capsicum, cassis, tomato leaf, and you expect it to have those really hard tannins. But really sort of soft tannins to that. Still got really a nice, clean, crisp acid structure. I mean, our 2016, which is not released yet, I let it ripen a bit more on the vine to try and maybe reduce that tannin, acid structure a little bit more. But we actually won't release that wine. It's as soon as we did that, it changes the whole development of the tannins, and I didn't like it. It sort of fell apart, went too soft. 2017 that we did the same way. We was a little bit riper than the 2016, but not as ripe as as the 2015, but not as ripe as the 16. And I think that's smack on. It's like my favourite out of the 3 so far. But you guys won't get to taste it for another few years, I'm afraid. So last one. So last one's something special. So the oldest record of winemaking in the world comes from a country called Georgia in Eastern Europe, and it's dated 6000 BC. Now, that's 3,000 years before Egypt. So if you're into history at all, it's a little bit technical. There's a book called Ancient Wine, really interesting, and it basically, as we evolved pottery and we could store liquid, we evolved winemaking. And so what they did, they found these pottery shards that had tartaric acid in them. Now, tartaric acid, the only fruit in the world that produces tartaric acid is grapes. So they knew that grapes had been stored in these pottery shards. They could carbon date the pottery, 6000 BC. And then they found round, fat grape seeds. Now, if I take a wild grapevine and I cultivate it, the seeds start as long and skinny, and the more I cultivate it, they become fat and round. So they found these fat round seeds, and then they found these pottery shards that had tartaric acid in it. And so from there, they said, this is our first tangible record of winemaking in the world. Now, there's some anecdotal evidence that winemaking was around a lot longer. There's actually a famous statue in Georgia of a man drinking out of a sheep horn, and that's the traditional way that they actually drink wine in Georgia, is out of a sheep's horn. And that statue is dated 10,000 BC. But they can't prove beyond any doubt that it was actually wine being drunk by that guy. And so anecdotal evidence says winemaking may have been around longer, but actual tangible evidence is 6000 BC. So I was lucky enough to have spent 7 years consulting in Georgia. I'd do 6 months here, 6 months there for 7 years. And it's like an amazing country. The winemaking, you know, I was teaching them about how to bring their wines to the world and new age techniques and sort of standards and quality standards and things like that. But they were teaching me some of these really ancient ways of making wine. And, you know, we've seen this movement come up in Australia in the last probably 5 years of these natural wines, like those on skins, whites and orange wines and those sort of things. I mean, they were developed in Georgia. That's their way of making wine. So one of the famous styles they do in Georgia is called Kinsmorelli. Our 8,000 vintages is a Kinsmorelli wine, essentially. It's not a true Kinsmorelli because it's not from the Kinsmorelli region, but it's true to style. So if you've not tried anything like this before, the only way I can describe it is maybe like a light port or something, but it is like true to style. I get a lot of Russians and Eastern Europeans buying this wine from us because it is exactly what they used to buy back in Georgia. And, you know, it is famous over there. Even, I think it was in 2002 or something when Georgia put an embargo on imports of wine from, Russia put an embargo on imports of wine from Georgia. It was still our biggest market. We actually used to smuggle the Kinsmorelli across the border in the school buses to get it in there. It's that famous. So very famous style. I love this style. This is, you know, that American style barbecue, that really smoky style barbecue. This is the perfect match for that. So either a really smoky barbecue or a really quite hard, bitter style, like really mature cheddar, or high percentage dark chocolate, like a really dark chocolate. They're great matches with this wine. And you'll notice it's got that really nice fruity softness to it, and that fruit sweetness to it, but at the same time it's got this body to it. You know, it's one of the things that I think Australian winemakers as a whole don't do well, is we don't do sweet well. You know, when I taste sweet wines all around Australia, the majority of sweet wines are made by big companies, and they're thin, untextured sweet wines. They're almost like lolly water, whereas the Europeans do so many great sweet wines, and we do a sweet Riesling as well, which I haven't included in this, which is a really German style Riesling. And you know, when you taste wines that are made to be sweet but properly to be sweet, they really hold their own. It's something that we don't do well generally in Australia, and that's what I love about this. You know, it does have that real sweet fruitness to it, but at the same time, it's got layers of complexity and tannin and structure. And so, yeah, 8,000 vintages. So, guys, that's our wine tasting. I really hope you enjoyed it. I am hoping in the future to do some short little, I guess, little videos of the winery and live sessions of the winery to demonstrate some cool techniques that we do. Someone's just asked me why we don't do any orange wines. I love orange wines, and this year I'd actually planned to launch an orange wine. Last year we launched what's called a pet nat, which is a really natural way of making sparkling wine. So it's sort of the way they made method traditional before method traditional. So the French call it method ancestral. So that was my big project last year, was to launch that, and that's been a huge success. And I absolutely love pet nat. Got one in my fridge actually. That's one of my favourite ones. And surprisingly, you know, I released that pet nat because I thought it's a cool style and I love drinking it, and saw natural, you know, no sulfur, no additives, it's all vegan. But I didn't realise how trendy it was. So I've already had like Ari and Rockpool and all these people trying to buy this pet nat offers, but I didn't make enough of it this year. So next year, well, actually, I should have said not this year, 2019. This year we made nothing. So I had planned to make some orange wines this year and to do some really skin contact wines, but unfortunately, thanks to the fires, we didn't do that this year. But next year, it's definitely on my target. I'm actually working on closely with a friend of mine over in Georgia, importing a query. So a query is, you know, you see these amphoras that they use in Italy, and it's quite trendy to use amphoras now. Well, those amphoras are actually designed, they're a smaller, more portable version of what was originally the way they used to make wine in Georgia, which is queries. And these queries are like a big amphora that's actually dug into the ground. So I really want to get one of those to make some really traditional orange skin contact wines. And I'm also hoping we've got a new vineyard we've just taken over, which is a really exciting project, because you'll notice, even though we run our vineyard all biodynamically, none of our wines are certified. And that's because to certify, we need to lease, we lease our vineyards, and to certify, we need to certify the entire farm. And because up until recently, we only ever leased the vineyard, we haven't been able to. So we've just taken over a new vineyard. It's one of the biggest ones in the Highlands, but it also includes the whole farm. So over the next 5 years, we'll get certification, and we're going to be putting in that vineyard some traditional Georgian style varieties. We want to try and get some Pazzatelli and some Saperavi up there. And so we'll start seeing some orange wines. And, you know, I love those real natural styles and funky styles. So I'm looking forward to all that sort of thing. So guys, yes, hope you enjoyed it. You can come and join us every Saturday. We're going to do this every Saturday. I am getting a little bit sick of pouring our wines into 50ml bottles, but it's worth it. At least we're sort of out there, and I can still, and you know, this is one of the things about the winemaking is, you know, I spent a lot of time locked in the cellar and locked out in the vineyard. So I love talking to people or interacting with people and telling them about our wines. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love you guys. You got a voucher for our wine store. I'd love you to buy some wines. We don't really make much at all on these tastings. This is more about just getting out there. If you are from the Southern Highlands or from the South Coast, I tell you to go and have a look at a great site called the Mill Barrel. And so this is a really great initiative for some local businesses. That used to be a weekly farmers market, and they've just taken that weekly farmers market and made it online. So it's a virtual farmers market. So, you know, I just love to say, just if you're in those regions that market does sort of service, check it out. There's some really cool things that they're selling. It's really helping a lot of local producers down here. I know that have, struggled past the fires, and now they're in this COVID thing. But this little market has really done a great thing. So guys, hope you enjoyed it. I look forward to seeing you again sometime. Do follow our YouTube channel, because I do plan to take you out to the vineyard sometime. I do plan to give you a little sparkling tour, because we do a range of sparkling wines. I spent a bit of time working with Shandong, and so unfortunately I can't send them out, but I hope to show you some techniques. I hope to talk you through some things. So stay tuned, and guys, have a lovely Easter. Eat lots of Easter eggs. If you have dark Easter eggs, remember, match it to that 8,000. And guys, look after yourselves, stay well, and I'll see you next time.